London, the capital city of the United Kingdom, has long been a symbol of wealth, influence, and opportunity. It is one of the richest cities on the planet, with an economy worth over $500 billion. If London were a country in its own right, it would rank as the world's 26th largest economy, roughly equal in size to Norway's. For nearly 2 centuries, London has been the beating heart of high-value industries such as finance, law, and professional services. These sectors have offered some of the highest wages in Europe and have drawn ambitious people from all over the globe. However, behind the glittering glass towers of Canary Wharf, the luxury shops of Mayfair, and the grand facades along the River Thames, there is a very different reality. In 2023, local councils estimated that more than 1 in every 50 residents of London was homeless. That is a staggering increase of more than 50% compared to just a decade earlier. This has pushed the United Kingdom to the top of a list that no nation wants to lead. It now has the highest homelessness rate among developed countries. This crisis has unfolded during a time when real wages, the amount people take home after adjusting for inflation, have barely moved in more than 15 years. In practical terms, the average worker is being paid about the same amount as in 2008, while the prices of almost every good and service have risen sharply. Housing, in particular, has skyrocketed in cost, placing home ownership far out of reach for millions. For many people, the financial math no longer works. A junior professional in New York City can earn more than twice the salary they would make in London, with the cost of living only about 1/3 higher. That makes moving abroad a financially rational decision. As a result, thousands of young and highly skilled Britons, including many doctors and nurses from the National Health Service, are leaving the country each year in search of better pay, better working conditions, and a better quality of life. At the same time, immigration to the United Kingdom is at record levels. More people from outside the country are arriving to work or study than ever before. While the main draw for many newcomers is the United Kingdom's world-class education system, there is a troubling imbalance. Research from 2015 revealed that those leaving the country are, on average, far more skilled than those arriving. Over the past decade, net migration has increased the pool of low-skilled workers in the British economy while shrinking the base of high-skilled talent. This shift is not good for productivity, innovation, or the long-term health of the economy. Why is one of the wealthiest nations in the world struggling to hold on to its best and brightest? A major factor is the steady decline in living standards. If London's population and economic output were removed from the national figures, British living standards would instantly fall by about 14%. That would place the remaining United Kingdom below Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States, in terms of per capita economic performance. The gap between Britain and its European neighbors has widened dramatically in recent years. In 2007, the average British household was only 8% worse off than the average household in northwestern Europe. Today, that gap has reached a record 20%. If current trends continue, the average Slovenian household will be better off than the average British household by 2024, and the average Polish household will surpass Britain's by the end of this decade. This economic stagnation has not affected everyone equally. The burden has fallen hardest on those with lower incomes. While the wealthiest Britons rank 5th in the world for living standards, the average household ranks 12th, and the poorest 5% rank 15th. In fact, last year the poorest households in the United Kingdom had a standard of living that was 20% lower than the poorest households in Slovenia. A major part of this problem is housing. There are simply not enough homes in the United Kingdom, and the ones that do exist have become increasingly unaffordable. The roots of the crisis go back decades. In the late 1970s, the government introduced the Right to Buy scheme, which allowed tenants in public housing to purchase their homes at a discount. At the time, the policy was seen as progressive and transformative. For many families, it made home ownership possible for the first time. However, the properties that were sold were not replaced at the same rate, and over time the stock of social housing shrank dramatically. Since the 1970s, the number of social homes has fallen by about 25%, even as the population has grown. Today, England alone has 1.4 million fewer social housing units than it did in 1980. With fewer affordable homes available, more people have been forced into the private rental market, where demand far exceeds supply. That competition drives rents ever higher, especially in large cities. House prices have been rising faster than wages for more than 30 years, deepening the divide between those who own property and those who do not. The financial cost to local councils is enormous. In 2023 alone, they spent nearly £1.8 billion on emergency shelter, more than double the amount spent a decade earlier, even after adjusting for inflation. For younger generations, the housing crisis is especially bleak. Many older people own a second home, but young adults are far less likely to own even one. They are more likely to rent, and their wages have been stagnant for most of their working lives. In fact, those born in the 1980s are, on average, earning less by their early 30s than the generation before them earned at the same age. All of this is tied to a deeper issue: the collapse in productivity growth. Productivity is the measure of how efficiently a nation can produce goods and services with the resources it has, namely, labor and capital. Before the financial crisis of 2008, productivity in the United Kingdom was growing at about 2% per year. Since then, it has barely grown at all. One reason for this is a lack of investment. Since 2005, British companies have invested about 20% less than their counterparts in the United States, France, and Germany. That lack of investment has left businesses with outdated technology, underdeveloped skills, and less innovation. It has placed the United Kingdom in the bottom 10% of OECD countries for investment. The National Health Service, one of the most important public institutions in the country, has been hit especially hard by this stagnation. Created in 1948 to provide free health care at the point of use, the NHS has been a cornerstone of British life for more than 70 years. But in recent decades, it has been overwhelmed by rising costs and growing demand. The number of people on NHS waiting lists has climbed from 3 million in 2014 to 7.4 million today. Survival rates for serious illnesses such as heart disease, stroke, and cancer are below average compared to other developed countries. In some cases, they are the lowest among peer nations. While it is tempting to think that this is simply a matter of underfunding, the reality is more complicated. Since 2019, NHS funding has increased significantly, and staffing levels have risen as well. However, an aging population, the rising cost of new medical technologies, and higher staff wages have all absorbed these increases, leaving little money for long-term improvements. The same pattern is visible in other areas of infrastructure. Projects are often slow to start, expensive to complete, and sometimes abandoned altogether. The HS2 high-speed rail project is a prime example. Originally conceived to connect the north and south of England more efficiently, its costs ballooned from £37 billion to over £100 billion before major parts of it were cancelled. Brexit has also played a role in weakening the economy. Leaving the European Union has reduced trade with Britain's largest trading partner and made it harder for some skilled workers to come to the country. However, Brexit is only one factor among many. The roots of Britain's problems go back much further and involve decades of underinvestment, short-term policymaking, and an over-reliance on a handful of industries. For much of the 1990s and early 2000s, Britain enjoyed a period of optimism and growth. But the focus on quick economic wins often came at the expense of long-term planning. The privatization of public services was supposed to bring in capital for improvements, but in many cases it led instead to underinvestment as private companies prioritized profits over infrastructure renewal. Today, the country is paying the price. Even with the possibility of a change in government in the next general election, many of these problems are so deeply entrenched that they will take years, perhaps decades, to fix. For now, the truth is unavoidable. Britain is no longer the land of opportunity it once was. Living standards have declined, housing has become unaffordable, wages have stagnated, and public services are under severe strain. For many of the country's most talented and ambitious people, the best future they can imagine is not in the United Kingdom. It is somewhere else.